Look, good morning, Professor Boyle, distinguished members of the Global Security Plus Alliance, ladies and gentlemen, Professor McIntyre and Vanita in particular, who brought us all together today. It's a distinct honour and privilege for me to be with you today. I was delighted to be part of this momentous event, launching the global security arm of the Plus Alliance in Australia, because the reason we're here today celebrates the most vital capabilities we have to deal with the complex security challenges we face. These capabilities are expert knowledge and collaboration. I'll be speaking to you today specifically about my area of expertise, counterterrorism, but I'll be doing so to illustrate a range of broader issues and also specifically to stress the need for informed advice and informed debate. I'll take you through a couple of topical issues in the counterterrorism environment. The first is terrorist propaganda, to explore how important it is to be aware of how we communicate and how this fits into the information aspects of the fight against terrorism. The second issue, topical again, is encrypted communications, illustrating the real need for expertise and collaboration on not only complex policy, but complex technical innovation, and the importance of this in striving for the balance between security and individual rights. And thirdly, I'll try to pull this all together to talk about how we, and particularly you, experts in your fields, can engage with the current environment to help shape a better approach to security. My topic for today is tweeting with nuance, the challenge of countering violent extremism in the era of social media. And my aim today is to highlight the importance of harnessing expertise and knowledge in relation to hotly contested, sometimes oversimplified, and often emotive issues. The most obvious signs of this are the truncated 140-character tweets and other brief social media messages, which give a potentially far-reaching and sharp commentary on any and every issue. But there are other examples. Our current affairs programs, where comedians crack snappy one-liners on complex issues to a round of applause, particularly if anyone saw Q&A on Monday night here, and the round of applause from the audience. This type of approach to current affairs may make for great entertainment, but it hardly counts for informed commentary or adding to an enhanced understanding of complex issues. So why is this a problem? Because such debates, and particularly the debates we have in the global security environment, are never one-sided. A simplistic commentary on one side begets an equal and opposite reaction. And while a debate defined around extremes may still lead to a compromised solution, which some may seem is appropriate, I'll argue that this will almost always be suboptimal to a multifaceted, nuanced and broad appreciation of an issue, explored in a fulsome and collaborative manner to achieve the optimal outcome. And this, of course, is what you're doing through your Plus Alliance initiative. Information and knowledge is more accessible and more avoidable than ever before. As a 24/7 news cycle and social media push out simplistic, headline-grabbing statements about the state of the world, what is the role of expertise? Are we there? Is there a role for us in this discussion? And how can we hope to access and shape both public understanding of complex issues and, importantly, informed policy responses? One of the enduring challenges in countering terrorism is ensuring governments and the communities they serve continue to seek a balance between security and privacy. If all players in public policy commence their inquiries and engagement with an understanding and a commitment to the equal importance of both, it's much more likely that both will be achieved. We currently live in an environment of a populist versus leftist or socially progressive debate, two extremes defining the issue often in an unpalatable and ultimately unhelpful way. The result, in terms of many of the cases I'll be talking about and others in Australian public policy, but I would say the same we've seen in the United Kingdom and United States, is that political debate, public consultation, often becomes a matter of withstanding or conceding to firmly held positions or even battering rams, rather than creating nuanced, balanced, strategic policy and laws that have regard both to our moral and legal values and an eye to the vagaries of the future. I'll now explore this further through examining these two areas of current CT debate. First, the issue of terrorist propaganda. Terrorism, as you're aware, is one of the most serious threats facing our countries today. In Australia, for almost 3 years, we've been living with the advice that a terrorist attack is likely. In that time, we've witnessed 5 successful terrorist attacks and 12, I would argue, more successful disrupted terrorist plots, as well as a range of other terrorist-related activity, ranging from a 15-year-old Sydney girl here in this city sending thousands of dollars to her uncle, a foreign fighter. Again in Sydney, to Hamdi Al-Qudsi and Mohammed Baralai, recruiting and facilitating the financing and movement of about 20 young Australians to fight with the designated terrorist group, the so-called Islamic State. And just an hour away from where I'm based in Canberra, in Young, Haitham Zahab a few months ago was found to be providing technical assistance to developing Islamic State's weapons capability. This is all a very strange phenomenon for a country like Australia, a country relatively free of terrorism and conflict, yet with around 400 to 500 citizens and residents from various backgrounds and walks of life being drawn to and inspired by a cause focused half a world away. Around 100 Australians are with jihadist terrorist groups in the Middle East. Another 70 odd have already died there, and around 40 have returned home for a variety of reasons. More than 60 are in prison at present, and we're advised that authorities are investigating around 200 more who are seeking to support jihadist extremism, including through undertaking acts of violence here and in our region. Australians are rightly asking where this has come from, what it means, what to do about it. The Lowy Institute poll in 2015 found that terrorism rated as the issue causing most concern and fear to Australians. A recent Unisys survey has found the same. And it's understandable to be afraid. Events in the past few months, in Baghdad, where a young Australian girl was amongst those murdered at an ice cream parlour, through to the recent attacks in the UK and Jakarta, have shown the shock and horror of random, callous and violent attacks on the public. So what's led people down this path? Much of the discussion in Australia is focused on what might make some people vulnerable to radicalisation and how to stop this. Issues such as language and identity, multiculturalism, education and opportunity. We certainly see this in the research underpinning efforts to counter violent extremism. But these large, overlapping and often intractable issues can quickly accelerate until suddenly it looks like we're trying to solve world peace or world poverty and it all becomes too hard. In the world of policy and academia, we're focused on trying to unpack and understand this phenomenon based on evidence and bring that evidence to inform practical policies and actions to address the issue. The shorthand language used to describe the radicalisation and recruitment path doesn't easily lend itself to understanding this very complex issue. There is no simple calculus of cause and effect. Radicalisation is not an act, a quick conversion of the vulnerable, if you like. It's a process. A critical element of this is the individual progressing through to an echo chamber, that is, where all information reinforces the terrorist worldview. In relation to Islamist extremism, what is termed the single narrative, the one way to see the world that is always self-reinforcing. It may be a single narrative, but it's not a simple one. It's the result of considered development, ongoing nurturing and management by extremist organisations. Terrorism is all about propaganda. We know this from the days of guerrilla uprisings and airline hostage takings in the 1960s and 70s. and it's the same today. We know, for example, that ISIS established formal information operation headquarters as one of the first steps it took in each area that it laid claim to in its territorial expansions in the Middle East and North Africa. Reports from those who saw these operations describe them a bit like an episode of Mad Men. You know, it's an American TV series about some advertising executives, men sitting around tables, brainstorming on whiteboards. How do we reach out to this community? What messages work here? Who do we use as our brand frontman? This, for example, is how Australia got Tarek Kamle, the former paediatrician who's recently reappeared in some Islamic State propaganda. And Neil Prakash focused on propaganda here to try to entice Australians to go to fight in the Middle East. It's also why issues of the ISIS online magazines published Australian place names and photos of prominent landmarks calling for attacks. And all pushed out online to our country with one of the world's highest smartphone uptakes, supported by bloggers in English around the globe. Different languages, different messages for different audiences. French speakers, Bahasa, German, Arabic, they have a product for you. But a populist debate that describes terrorism in simplistic terms based on religion and nationality can feed into the terrorist narrative. Populism cuts both ways. Populist statements that generalise against, for example, all Muslims, all migrants, all foreigners, play a very important role in propaganda. These provide a ready-made reference for propagandists to reinforce their ideology. In the case of ISIS, Al-Qaeda and other jihadist terrorists, their ideology is based on producing an image of a war being waged between Muslims and others, and any statements of these kind are eagerly incorporated into the propaganda machine. This isn't to say that we should limit our open debate and freedom of speech and avoid discussing any issues. Not at all. This is, of course, the hallmark of human rights and liberal democracy. But it is vitally important that we're aware of how terrorist groups use information and make informed and smart decisions about how we debate issues of public policy. So what can we do? The first thing is just to understand that terrorist propagandists are trying to control the narrative, and it serves their purpose to have different narratives in different places, playing to local divisions. After all, terrorist organisations don't have to tell the truth. They don't have to be responsible and accountable as a democratic government does, responsible to stakeholders as a business has to be, and as we citizens and individuals have to be in a democracy. And the simple divide between populism on one side and the left or socially progressive also plays into this dialectic. For in Australia and other first world countries, even a well-meaning narrative that says Australia is racist and anti-Muslim also works well to provide some support and simplistic sympathy or justification for terrorism, and provides the propaganda base essential for radicalisation. This is supported by a general narrative about injustice in the Middle East and a foreign cause to be fought for. Indonesia, our nearest neighbour, is the largest Muslim country in the world, so of course the racist anti-Muslim narrative lands on barren ground there. The argument put forward for Indonesian extremist supporters is instead about a particular form of Islam and linking to resurgent ethno-nationalist movements, while the idea of a true caliphate being formed has been seen as very appealing for some Indonesians who chose to migrate to the so-called Islamic State. Chechen fighters left from the Caucasus following a Russian clampdown, while Uyghurs, Rohingya, Abu Sayyaf in the Philippines and some African movements see this cause as one that supports their ongoing insurgencies in different ways that appeal to their own particular cultures and histories. So, what does this mean? What action can we take? It means that we must reposition ourselves away from taking our freedom of speech, criticism and debate for granted. Understand that these are now factors in the battle over information. And understand that the way we engage in this debate needs to be carefully considered. But it's also an opportunity to share knowledge and help to deal with the issue. An example of the damage that can result all round is the ongoing issue of the US migration ban And I won't go into that into too much detail because I'm sure everyone has their opinions on that. But I will make one observation. In the well-founded interests of social justice, the debate in the Western world has succeeded in drowning out the fact that the United States has been, for the past 20 years, and continues to be, the single greatest permanent resettler of refugees globally. Even with the proposed halving of the refugee program to 50,000, that still leaves the US with an annual regular refugee resettlement program larger than all the countries of Europe put together. Australia has also been criticised during this debate, but still remains the third largest permanent resettler of refugees. These should be powerful messages of the good that can be done in the world, but are drowned out in the vitriol around these issues, which seeks to oversimplify an issue into good or bad. I'll now turn to the topic of encrypted communications. This is an extremely important issue, as it's both topical and cuts to the quick of the complexity of the interplay between security and privacy, protection of the many and the rights of the individual. If you've been following the current debate, and it's actually hard to avoid in Australia at the moment, you might be familiar with the issue being characterised as one where governments, Australia and notably its Five Eyes partners, including the US and UK, are seeking to deal with the issue of going dark in investigating terrorists and other criminals as they use easily available encrypted communications. This has been a leading news story for the past few weeks in most of our countries and has featured on news, current affairs, TV, radio and talkback. The standard public debate in Australia, and here I'm thinking of an example from a very reputable TV news program I saw this weekend, is to define the debate as follows: that the Australian government is seeking a backdoor to access all our encrypted communications, banking, Facebook, booking accommodation, my orders to Amazon, and that this is an unacceptable invasion of privacy and technologically weakens encryption, which can lead to malicious use, as seen in the WannaCry ransomware attacks. The conclusion to this way of simplifying and seeing the debate is that the whole issue is terrible and accessing encrypted communications cannot be condoned in any form. While the level of public interest in this issue is heartening, particularly for those of us who beaver away in the background of national security policy, what is concerning is the lack of nuanced understanding about the issue, the laws and the technology that underpin it, and indeed, from an Australian perspective, as well as our US and UK partners, how Australian government agencies work. I'm certainly not saying that this is an open and shut case. It isn't. Its complexities are many. They go to issues such as rule of law, differences in jurisdictions, authorities for technical interception, who may access captured data, how that data must be handled, how Australian agencies operate as well as others, how we deal with how businesses deal with corporations law, and how high-tech industries are structured and operate. It also goes to the very nature of criminality, the rights and responsibilities of citizens, and of course, our freedom and privacy. And this is before we even get to the technical elements of what encrypted communications are and how they work. These are truly complex matters, wicked problems if you like. But the nature of much of our public debate suggests that we want to reject complexity in favour of a comfortable, albeit simplistic and perhaps at times even false, understanding of the issue. For those who might want to understand how this story might progress, and I'll beg the indulgence of an audience of academics with a love for detail, I'll briefly expand on this case. Encrypted communications technology, such as WhatsApp and Telegram, were created by various companies, but most of the best known names have now been purchased by the larger, very well-known companies such as Microsoft or Facebook. They're used daily by millions of people for legitimate purposes. And by the way, we're not talking about banking transactions or my Amazon orders and all other encryption, just communications. Criminals, not just terrorists, but organised crime, pedophiles, pirates, people smugglers, those involved in kidnap for ransom, have also discovered the utility of encrypted communications. So they're being used to perpetrate crime. and to avoid detection. Under the law, in many liberal democracies, and certainly the 3 countries represented in this alliance, communications providers must, in certain circumstances, provide law enforcement with access to communications to assist investigations. This was relatively easy at the time in Australia when there was just one phone company and the government owned it. But it was poles and wires, so easy to monitor and access if needed and with appropriate authority. What agencies in the government have raised for debate here is how to continue the principle of targeted lawful access in an environment of digital communications, end-to-end encryption and multiple providers, often located offshore. Australia's intelligence and law enforcement agencies do not have the authority or the resources or the interest, from what they tell me, to hoover up vast quantities of data. And this is not what's being proposed, but they do need to be able to investigate possible threats with appropriate checks, balances and oversight, and collect evidence to prosecute where warranted. And there are plenty of reasons to be optimistic about the way ahead, or about some reasonable way ahead in this field. The capabilities that we use for our digital engagement, including encrypted communications, are developed and managed and housed within the global rules-based order. They've been developed by businesses as value propositions. The service may appear to be free, but there is profit. It may come from advertising, collecting our data to assist marketing, or selling off to other providers. These corporations live in the real world and operate under corporations law, including, for example, to not facilitate crime. Facebook may seem to us like it's in a cloud, but its headquarters in Menlo Valley, California is a very real bricks and mortar operation. WhatsApp may be free, but this is part of Facebook's business plan. You don't pay $19 billion for something, as Facebook did to purchase WhatsApp, just to give it away. So in this case, the answer lies in collaboration with industry. The technological companies involved in encrypted communications didn't develop this for the bad guys to profit from, and they didn't develop it to break laws. We can't get rid of it altogether, but we can make it harder to get. I don't expect we can stop Eastern European arms trafficking cartels from using encrypted communications easily. But I do expect that a 15-year-old kid in Sydney can't go within minutes from meeting a Syrian-based foreign fighter online to having an encrypted discussion to plan a terrorist attack. But this is exactly what happened 2 years ago in Sydney, when Neil Prakash, a terrorist in Syria, was able to easily contact and direct a kid here to plot an attack on Anzac Day. Charging for access might be one thing, regulating how access to the service is provided, requiring the companies to develop the key to unlock and access if needed. I'm not sure what the answer will be, other than that it will look different from what it had been before with the old technologies. But I am confident that engaging broadly on the issue, bringing together expertise, bringing together collaboration with business, academia and our community will get us somewhere better. I'm confident about it because I've seen this in the way that these same companies are dealing with online bullying, exploitation, propaganda, and how banks, academics and countries with widely different legal and cultural regimes have jointly created the new and very effective approaches to countering terrorism financing globally, with extraordinary outcomes. So this brings me to my third and final issue, and that is, how do we repackage these very complex ideas so that they can be communicated effectively in the current environment, tweets and all? If you take one thing away from my talk today, let it be this: that serious issues of global security are always complex, but populist rhetoric doesn't deal easily with complexity, either in its analysis of a problem or its proposed solution. If it fits into a 140-character tweet, it's probably not going to explain the whole issue. But we need to understand this as a dominant form of the way public policy is now formed, understood and debated, and we need to engage with it. The current wave of jihadist extremist terrorism is a complex issue with many and varied factors at play, both in understanding the phenomenon and dealing with it. Like world peace, world hunger and climate change, countering terrorism can neither be understood nor addressed in a simplistic way. Populist rhetoric can describe terrorism in extremely simplistic terms, a black and white problem with a black and white solution. To illustrate this, I'll briefly refer to some research we recently undertook with the University of Chicago into US terrorism cases and how this relates to a populist understanding of what a terrorist looks like. All the existing research we had in the terrorism space, and those of you who work in this space would be familiar with it, had come from of a first world environment of terrorism, had come from European research. And it told us that those people who were interested in terrorism were essentially Muslim, were migrants, were disengaged, disenfranchised, ghettoised, and probably engaged in crime. We thought anecdotally that it might be a little bit different in Australia, and we went to the US because we had a bigger data set of cases to be able to look at. So to understand the American experience of ISIS, we drilled into data from the 112 cases of Americans indicted for ISIS-related terrorist offences. We chose this because we had a good-sized data set to work from and detailed, consistent information from the court cases. What we found surprised many, and that was that the American supporters of ISIS looked remarkably like the average American. Unlike their European counterparts, most were employed, either in full-time work or study, and few had been previously involved with crime. Notably, the vast majority, 83%, so that's 83%, were American citizens. 65% were born in the US. 30%, so a third of all of those charged with terrorism offences in the US in the last 3 years since the advent of ISIS, were converts to Islam. That is, not from the Muslim community. And they constituted about half of those who were born in the US. Those with offences related directly to an attack in the US were split 50-50 between recent converts and those with Muslim community grounds. And when I say a convert, it was very clear that the conversion wasn't a religious conversion, it was something linked to following this extremist ideology. Our research was published around the same time as the US migration suspension. Timing is indeed everything, and I was on the phone at 3 a.m. with my colleagues to try and make sure we could get something out, to get facts into this highly politicised space. We're proud that we were able to add complexity and nuance to a better understanding of the environment and what was really going on. Surprise, surprise, there weren't any Syrian refugees indicted for ISIS offences. The solutions weren't as simple as some might have liked, but that seemed to be a good indicator that we might be somewhere approaching a true understanding of what was going on in this very complex issue. So I've talked about celebrating complexity, driving for a nuanced understanding of issues in order to drive good policy. And that's the work that you're involved in. But now comes the difficult part, how to get this knowledge out to share and shape the debate. When I was asked to set up the Counterterrorism Policy Centre 2 years ago, I engaged with key stakeholders to see where we should focus our research effort. I came up with a list. Was it foreign fighters, prison-based radicalisation, measuring the effectiveness of countering violent extremism programs in the community? And for those involved in the field, you know that this is the holy grail because it's very, very difficult to do. But the response surprised me. Stakeholders said, yep, sure, there are plenty of CT topics to look at and we'd like you to look at them. But the number one request, not only from security agency heads, police officers, ministers, but also from members of the community, members of the media and academics was, help us explain what's really going on. Talk about the environment, about what we're actually doing, the challenges, the modest successes, the extraordinary successes. Tell them what we can't easily get out. And I say this to you, after understanding the problem in all its beautiful complexity, it is incumbent on you to go out and engage with our community. Communicate with the world, policymakers, members of the public, and help them to understand the essence of the things that you know so well. But learn how to articulate in a way they can understand. Having been christened with the fire of doing that coming from the public service a couple of years ago, I do understand how difficult and daunting that can be. I tend to get calls from the media when there are terrorist attacks. Recently, with the London Bridge attacks, I was being interviewed on some live TV. I do counterterrorism and I do policy, I do Middle East politics. That's my job. I was prepared to talk about the threat, what they'd done, how this fitted into the bigger threat picture in the UK and Europe, what authorities had done about it and what we could learn. And then they asked me on live TV, what about mums and dads worrying about their kid travelling in the United Kingdom? What should they do? This is the hook. This is what interests people and what makes them listen to the issues that we're talking about. I was surprised with the question, but it dawned on me. I see my specific areas of expertise as you do, but when others look to you, they see an expert. They see someone who can talk to them, can explain all of the issues that are going on. You are the experts, but to have influence, you need to be aware of your constituents. Politicians, policymakers, corporations, media, and yes, mums and dads. So I leave you with these three things. We've looked at encrypted communication, terrorist propaganda, and how to get a clear knowledge-based message out through all of the noise that occurs in our world. Countering violent extremism and terrorism is my main focus. But this topic of this issue could as easily be the rise of Donald Trump, the intercontinental ballistic missile and nuclear threat from North Korea, climate change, vaccination and anti-vaxxers, same-sex marriage. All of these are topics of current debate, all carried out in the public domain, principally through hostile sides shouting simplistic and sometimes intolerant accusations at each other. We can do better, we must do better. You hold within you knowledge and expertise, and possibly most importantly, your eagerness to collaborate with each other, which is shown by today's event. This gives our society the chance to really understand the big issues we're dealing with. Sustainability, global health, social justice, technology and innovation, and now global security. And from understanding the complexity, the challenge, the interconnectedness of things, propose ways to move forward. Not yelling your tweets, but consciously sharing your knowledge through mentoring to build the next generation of knowledge. We have quite a day ahead, and I marvel at the ideas and the insights that will be bouncing around us today, the discovery and the information that will emerge from the workshops this afternoon. For knowledge and expertise, shared and nurtured, is the way of progress. And then the challenge of taking your message forward, simple, streamlined and engaged, to enhance our broader community understanding and debate. Thank you.